avoiding unintended consequences as much as we can. So what I'll do today is run through a pretty quick presentation that just gives a high-level understanding of what we're trying to achieve, some of the issues we've faced. It is just that, it's high level. I would encourage you, if you're seeking more detail, beyond just asking questions today, to get on our website. There's a lot of information on the website that we've produced for this project. I understand it's not necessarily as easy to find as we would like, but we're sending out some reminders to people to get involved in the consultation. Send us your feedback. Let us know what you think this will mean for people like you and businesses like yours. If you have any more issues getting hold of the information, please get in touch and we will help you find what you need. So this slide here is a pretty standard slide that we do on most of our presentations. Whilst I've had some criticisms of the colour scheme, the intent really is to show two things. Firstly, to show that what we are trying to achieve is a scalable and proportionate regulatory framework, integrated as much as possible between the various elements. So what we are trying to achieve here with Part 43 is a scalable and proportionate set of regulations for the GA airworthiness community that is integrated with the fundamental safety risk framework of the new flight operations regulations. The other point is the applicability of Part 43, because even though we've been working this project for a few years now and actively consulting as much as we can with industry, there are still a few misconceptions floating around there, or misunderstandings. So to be very clear, the new Part 43 is only proposed to apply in the private and aerial work sectors. Part 43 will not apply to any of the air transport sectors. So whether you're thinking about that in terms of the old charter and RPT or the new Part 133, 135, 121, Part 43 does not have any impact on aircraft carrying out those operations. When we talk about aerial work, as you can see in this chart, we're talking about the broader aerial work sectors. So flying, training, parachuting, aerial applications, all of those things that are typically grouped within aerial work. When I'm talking about private and aerial work, I'm talking about all of those things that are not air transport. To be clear too, just in case there are any questions, we're not talking about RPAS or balloons or those other more specialised sectors. Those are jobs for a future project. At this point, I'll also mention, since there's a diagram that illustrates what we're talking about, there are obviously aircraft that can traverse that hard line. So when we talk about air transport operations, it's exactly that. It's the operation. It's not the certification category of the aircraft. So there is a difference between an aircraft that is type certified in the transport category and an aircraft that is doing transport category operations. So it is very possible and reasonably common for transport category certified aircraft to be operating in the private and aerial workspace. So large biz jets or large helicopters doing aerial work. It is quite common to see transport category aircraft within Part 43. Equally, it's quite common to see aircraft that are not type certified in the transport category doing air transport operations. So it is quite possible that an aircraft that was doing private operations one day might be sold, or the business might decide to open that aircraft or make that aircraft available for an air transport operation. So how people transition across from Part 43 into the air transport regulations is a known concern for a lot of people, and we've produced quite a lot of information that explains how we go about that. It won't be any secret, and I'll get to the answer now, but it's exactly what we do now. So it's not a surprise. It's nothing to be afraid of. It's just an issue that this conversation around Part 43 is highlighting for some people. Thanks, Fee. Next one. All right, so we set out on this journey several years ago. If you actually want to track this back, this is part of Casa's reg reform program that started over 20 years ago. We are still working towards transitioning all of the old 88 cars into the new Casa reg set. We've had a couple of goes at this GA maintenance over the years. The last one was about 10 years ago, where we were proposing an expansion of the EASA-based reg set that we brought in Part 42 and 145. Having been on the outskirts of that, I can say it was not well received by industry, and in a nutshell, the response was, Casa, why don't you go away and think about it and come back when you've considered the FARs? So that's effectively what has been behind this project right from the start. We have engaged with industry in 2018 to say we're starting again on GA maintenance. What does industry think would be a reasonable basis to frame our new rules on? That survey came back with a fairly expected overwhelming vote for the FARs. We ran with that, went away, did our analysis. We agree that the FARs is a technically appropriate and good cultural fit for the Australian GA industry. And so we, over the last 2 to 3 years, have been working very hard with technical working groups and industry more broadly to integrate the FAR regulatory set into the Australian regulatory framework. So it is not copy and paste of the FARs. A fairly obvious difference that we've always maintained and been open about is we are not introducing a FAR US style license. We are integrating the Casa Part 66 license into this regulatory project. So there are a range of differences from the FARs, but we have used the FARs as guiding principles to produce what we think is a more proportionate, more scalable, more appropriate regulatory set with less administration and more flexibility for industry. Okay, Fee, next one. So right from the start, this has been very much part of the reduce red tape. We need to maintain appropriate safety outcomes, and we've been very mindful of that. We don't want to lose ground on what we have now in terms of safety outcomes. Over many years, industry has been doing a really good job. The GA safety outcomes are really good, definitely comparable to any other country that we would benchmark against. So we don't want to lose that. But we also acknowledge that the current rules are administratively intensive and, generally speaking, less efficient than other rules in similar countries that we look at. Specifically, obviously, the US, but also benchmarking against New Zealand or Canada. Our rules do have a range of administrative features that are not requirements in other countries. A good example is that we're the only country that we benchmark against that requires maintenance orgs as a primary maintenance provider for the bottom end of the GA operational sectors. So that tells us something, not least that it is possible to get good safety outcomes with a lower administrative overhead for industry. Next one, Fee. So getting into a little bit more detail around what this will mean. Probably the most significant change that people are seeing is around the maintenance providers. So we are moving away from that current paradigm where only maintenance organisations, for the most part, can issue maintenance releases, which really opens up the business opportunities for smaller businesses, for licence holders. So in a nutshell, Part 43 is the centrepiece of Part 43 really is the Lamy. This is about providing better opportunities, more flexibility, facilitating small businesses for Lamys. When we look around other countries, we can see that that is exactly what they have done, and it provides very comparable, in some cases better, safety outcomes at a very high level than what we see in Australia. So whilst we've stuck with the Part 66 licence, we have taken this opportunity to provide more flexibility, but we've equally had to be very careful not to lose the integrity or diminish the safety outcomes in the air transport sectors. So what we've done is we have provided that flexibility within Part 43 because it is not intended to be available in the air transport sectors. So understanding how that works and how it has been framed has been an ongoing misunderstanding. This is certainly not about undermining or supplanting Lamys. This is about bringing Lamys to the forefront with more flexibility, but flexibility that is appropriate for the aerial work and private sectors. As an example, type ratings are no longer essential to work on type-rated aircraft. Type ratings remain available. They're still a very good way to get very broad privileges across a whole type reasonably quickly. But if a business doesn't need Lamys to extend their privileges across a whole type, or doesn't see the benefit of dropping $50,000 or more sending people overseas to attend foreign type rating courses, there are mechanisms in Part 43 for qualified Lamys to gain privileges in their local environment, demonstrating competency through on-the-job training with other qualified, competent people. So significant benefits and flexibility, but definitely not intended to diminish the good safety outcomes we're getting through the licensing system. Next slide, Fee. I'll keep it moving. In terms of what will come in, I think that's our next slide. Yep. So more flexibility across the board, specifically framed around administrative requirements. So that it's more outcome-based, but still competency-based. The biggest change in the regulatory sense is re-establishing the link between airworthiness certification through Part 21 and the continuing airworthiness rules. So at a high level, Part 21 is the airworthiness foundation. It's how we set the standards and how we decide whether an aircraft type or even a particular aircraft, if it's not a type-rated aircraft, is adequately safe to be operated in Australia. Unfortunately, for many years, we have lost that connection between airworthiness certification and the continuing airworthiness and management and maintenance sectors. So what Part 43 does is it reframes continuing airworthiness back around that Part 21 certification basis. In order to operationalise that, we've introduced one of the key features of the FARs, which is the Inspection Authorization. Unfortunately, for decades, our licence training has not gone into any detail around what Part 21 does. So when we are going to be asking a person to make a certification that an aircraft continues to comply with its certification basis, we need to make sure that that person is competent, demonstrably competent in that space. So the new inspection authorization is something that is framed around Lamys. You have to be a Lamy first, but you also have to pass an assessment managed by Casa that demonstrates you understand the Part 21 principles and the certification basis arrangements. So when you do an annual inspection or you approve an aircraft after a major modification or repair, it's demonstrated that you understand the basis on which you are making that determination. Next one, Fee. On the plus side, all of the core fundamental elements of airworthiness stay. So the registered operator remains responsible. They're responsible for managing the continuing airworthiness of the aircraft. Maintenance records still required. Tools, data, facilities, equipment, competent personnel, all of those things are still required under the performance rules. So even though we are being more flexible about maintenance outside of a maintenance organisation, the people doing maintenance still need to have the tools, data and facilities to do that work safely. Next one, thing. In terms of transition, we are trying to strike a reasonable balance here. So whilst overall it is good and agreed that we need to be more flexible for GA maintenance, that does come with some potential issues for existing business owners. We believe that that's reasonably managed because existing car 30s are still the best place to take advantage of the new flexibility. They still have the tools, data, facilities, they have the contracts. Not everybody wants to be a business owner. So we believe there's a lot of benefits here for car 30s, but equally, we don't want to move too quickly. So we are allowing those businesses 3 years to transition into the new rules, but we're bringing forward as much as we can, as quickly as we can, so that the benefits can accrue more quickly. Next one, Fee. So consultation is now open. Please get involved. The more you provide for us, the better we can make the reg set. Given that we've done a lot of policy work over the last 3 or 4 years, we are primarily asking the question, does the legislation and all of the guidance material accurately reflect the policies that we said we were working towards? So definitely the more information you can give us about that in a practical sense and potentially point out anything that might look like an unintended consequence, the better the reg set will be. Next one, Fee. What we've seen so far through 2 weeks is it's overall very positive. There are some people who have concerns, but I think that it's generally acknowledged that this is looking pretty good. It's looking simpler, more efficient, more proportionate, but like a lot of subjects, whilst there is a very high degree of acceptance, we need to do better in giving flexibility to GA. There are some differences of opinion as to exactly how we should do that. So cross-sector operations, that was one of the issues right from the start. There's some more information on our website, but really what we're looking at here is consistent with what has always been required. An aircraft always needs to comply with the rules that are applicable for the operations it's carrying out. So moving an aircraft from Part 43 into an air transport operation is exactly the same as would happen now. A private aircraft operating under Schedule 5 and the cars looking to move up into the old RPT, the new scheduled air transport, exactly the same process needs to be followed to make sure that the operator is addressing all of the requirements for the air transport rules when the aircraft is made available for those operations. Very similar also to buying second-hand aircraft from somewhere like New Zealand, USA. If you're getting an aircraft from another regulatory jurisdiction, obviously you need to make sure that the aircraft will comply with the Australian rules when it's operating in Australia. So there are processes and arrangements in place to manage that concern adequately. Next one, Fee. Maintenance permissions, a lot of concern here. Part 66 obviously is not our most popular reg ever, but there are a wide range of concerns from people that what we are doing here would have negative effects on Part 43. That's certainly not our intention. We have a range of activities underway for Lamy's. At a very high level, Part 43 is about providing more flexibility and better business opportunities for Lamy's who already have licenses. We also have a range of activities out there acknowledging that getting your standard B1 or B2 at the moment is unnecessarily difficult. So we are looking at ways to, I'm reluctant to say it like this, but move back and recognise that the old licensing system where you could get your airframe license and then build on that was a really good system. So looking at how we can do that under Part 66 and in parallel, but realistically a little bit longer, what we can do about dedicated GA licensing categories. Some of you would recall we've tried to do that before and fell at the final hurdle. So we will have another go, but that's a piece of work, well, several pieces of work that we intend to work and integrate with Part 43. So the whole system is meant to improve as a system, not piecemeal. IAs, still a few people not sure about how to get an IA, what the requirements are, a few issues around renewals. We can talk about that, but there's a lot of info on that on the website. And I'd say there's still a few people who have some general safety concerns. We do have a very safe industry at the moment. That's really good. A lot of people are concerned that a change would necessarily mean negative effects. At a policy level, we're very confident the FARs provide good safety outcomes. Our challenge, our primary challenge here, is to make sure that as we integrate that system with the Australian framework and we implement that, that we develop a really good and thorough understanding of what the new rules mean, and that we, working with industry, Casa is the regulator in industry, work towards getting the good safety outcomes that we know are possible. A lot of countries around the world have this system in GA. It's analogous between New Zealand, USA, Canada, very, very similar. Even the new EASA rules are picking up a lot of the FAR principles. So we are extremely confident that it's a safe reg set, but we actually need to do that in practice to get the outcomes we know are achievable. All right, I think that's it in terms of the presentation. So, Fee, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Well, now we're open for questions. As we have close to a full house this afternoon, and to ensure that everyone who wants to ask a question has the opportunity to do so, I'll ask that you initially limit your questions to no more than 2. If it's easier to ask a question rather than type it in, please raise your virtual hand. And if you're not sure how to do this, hover over the reactions icon at the top of the screen and choose the raise hand option. But don't forget to lower it once you've asked your question, because I may continually come back to you and think that you've got another question. If you have asked a question and popped it in the chat and we run out of time, we will take it on notice and endeavour to get back to you as soon as we possibly can. So I will just check the chat and see if we have any questions. And yes, we do. We have a question from Hayden Ben. Does that lead to a pathway of type rating using the Part 43 competencies? You obviously mentioned something about type rating.
Yes, so this is one of the issues with Part 66, is that it has been a bit of a closed shop. We did copy the EASA system. It is undeniably administratively intensive, and it continues to be a challenge working out ways where we can allow people to take credit for things that they've done in other ways, how they've gained competency. So at a high level, the answer is obviously yes. Any person can go to a registered training organisation, a maintenance training organisation, and get recognition of prior learning, which can then count as credit against the Part 66 requirements. I will be the first to acknowledge that process can be challenging and it can be expensive. So what we are looking at doing as we move forward with Part 43 is finding ways to make it a more progressive pathway. So we have always, as a regulator, provided non-licensing maintenance permissions. So not everybody who does maintenance on an aircraft needs to have a license. That becomes more and more prevalent as you move down the spectrum and maintenance and aircraft become more specialized and, generally speaking, simpler and easier to work on as you are in the recreational categories. So we would like to build a system where the maintenance permissions from the bottom build towards the maintenance permissions at the top. So things like our AMTCs, we would like to find pathways for a person who holds an AMTC and obviously has developed competency relevant to the scope, which is limited, of an AMTC, can take credit for that scope into potentially a GA license, which then leads into a full B1, B2, and then up into a type rating paradigm. So yes, that is our goal. And we would really like to find ways to facilitate that beyond just your basic RPL answer through a 147.
I'll ask further on that if I can. I'm sorry. So it sounds that you're trying to split the licensing. Obviously, you have the AMTCs, but then you're going to. So we're going to start having a GA license, and then which is different to a Part 145 license. Is that the scope? Is that what you guys are trying to do, or?
Well, it's sort of like that. So this way, a 145 can provide maintenance across the whole spectrum. Anybody can go to a 145 and have their maintenance done there. Similar with like a B1, B2. A B1, B2 can work across any aircraft covered by their license scope. If, I hope when, we introduce a GA license, any aircraft below the threshold of that license would be able to be maintained by that license holder. So as you work down, you're not excluded below, you're excluded above. So similar with AMTCs, AMTCs are framed at a level below the need for a formal license. They're really framed around specialized maintenance, recreational aircraft like experimentals and LSA. So ideally what we would have is each one building into the next step. The problem, of course, is making sure that we can accurately integrate the competency standards as we move up. Practical experience, usually pretty easy. Knowledge requirements is more challenging, making sure that we are adequately covering the knowledge and theory requirements without having to do a whole bunch of gap training, if you like, on the knowledge, because that just becomes administratively tedious. So the more we can align the knowledge syllabus, the easier a progressive licensing system is. I hope that answers the question. A lot of work to be done in that space. I will be the first to acknowledge that, but that is definitely the goal.
Now, Gordon has his hand up. So Gordon, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Fiona. Ben, I've actually got two questions. First one being is if an operator is in the aerial or in the private sector, can they opt to stay out of Part 43?
An operator can always, well, eventually Part 42 is not finished yet, but the idea will be you can always opt up. So you would be able to, if you were nominally a Part 43 aircraft, you could opt up into the air transport standards, but there is nowhere else to opt out. So you have to have your aircraft maintained. The cars are intended to be repealed. You know, we've been working on that for decades now, but it is still the goal. So for the next 3 years, an operator would be able to continue to have their aircraft worked on by Car 30s, but at the end of that transition period, people are going to have to move into the cars.
Okay, thank you. And the other one is, at the moment, a Car 30 or a 145 organisation that works on these lower class aircraft have some sort of cover with insurance and so forth. If it's just going to be the Lamy working on his own back, I presume then that is it a mandatory requirement for these Lamys to get personal indemnity insurance, or is that something that you're just going to leave out in the open, I guess, until something happens?
It's essentially the same as it is now. So there's no requirement under the civil aviation rules for a business to have insurance in that regard. It's really a matter for industry. Mick English, if you're online, you might like to talk to some of the details, but insurance has been a recurring question, particularly in relation to would insurance companies provide insurance to independent Lamys? To our understanding, yes, they will. So Mick, do you want to expand on that?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I spoke to a few insurance companies 2 years ago when we started off on this project, and there is a willingness on most of them to discuss the idea of insuring independent Lamys. One company already does it. They provide insurance for Lamys who work outside of a Car 30 organisation, move from organisation to organisation, and they're also quite happy to adjust that policy to work for independent Lamys, or to cover independent Lamys who don't work for any organisation. The rates are much the same. It's based on your turnover, and that's quite reasonable. You know, if anybody who's got the hangar keeper insurance would be aware that the insurance rates can be quite reasonable if you're on low turnover, which an independent Lamy would be. But yes, it is available.
Okay, thank you.
Next question, Ben, and it looks like a couple of people have asked the same question. What is transition to aircraft maintenance technician?
Okay, so the AMTC is primarily intended as a transitional measure for the non-licensing maintenance permissions we currently support. So this is an area of some, but not complete, difference from the FARs. It was framed in some cases around the American repairman certificate, particularly in relation to experimental aircraft maintenance and LSA, light sport aircraft maintenance. We have always also used the AMTC to transition existing authorisations like welding authorisations, NDT authorisations, CAR 42 ZC6 authorisations. So a range of unique Australian authorisations that serve a valuable purpose. There are lots of people out there who have them. Part of our guiding principle really was to make nothing worse. So whilst we are looking to adopt the FARs, we are also keeping the good Australian elements, like some of these things that give us more flexibility as you move down the spectrum. Not every kind of maintenance needs to be a 66 license. That's not the case now. It won't be the case in the future. So AMTCs are a system that allows us to have flexibility in that area for people who either don't want or don't need a license for those specialised tasks, or for the aircraft maintenance that doesn't warrant a full maintenance licensing outcome under 66. In terms of transition, people who've already got things like welding authorities or NDT authorities, they will be transitioned directly across if they want. For the other things like LSA AMTCs, that's an opt-in scheme. So if people want to take advantage of that scheme, then they can. I hope that answers the question.
Next question we have is, will Car 30 continue to exist? And can't or can, I'm not quite sure whether this is the typo, a Car 30 shop release an aircraft under Part 43?
Mick, would you like, given that I already answered that a 3-year transition there, would you want to get into a little bit more detail that they're probably seeking in that question?
Yeah, there are two ways the Car 30 can continue to maintain aircraft that are subject to Part 43. If they want to do it under their approval, the transition rules say that the old rules would still apply. In other words, you'd still maintain it as if it was subject to Parts 4 and 4A of car. If you want to do it as a Part 43 maintainer, you only need to be able to provide an IA to certify the annual inspection, and you can certify then as just as a Part 43 maintainer. You have two options there.
Okay, thanks, Mick. So another question, what replaces AD, engine 5, etc., and what limitations will there be on them?
Generally speaking, I'll get Mick to fill in the details, but at a high level, what we've had over many years is a deviation, if you like, of where and how we use airworthiness directives. Airworthiness directives are meant to be about type level deficiencies, safety concerns that originate from design or manufacture. In Australia, we have also used ADs to address real or perceived deficiencies with the maintenance regulations, and also in some cases, quite unusually, like AD 5, to provide relief. So what we are doing across the board, we did the same thing with Part 42, and we will continue to do it as we move from car into Casa, is we are looking to remove the unique Australian maintenance ADs that, generally speaking, supplement the maintenance regs, and make sure that we are picking up the good things as we move forward. So the idea with AD 5 is that the flexibility provided under that AD would remain. Mick might like to talk about how that can be accommodated under the Part 43 schedules.
Yes. Under Part 43, the only mandatory maintenance is that which is specified in the aircraft's airworthiness limitations or in an airworthiness directive. So Eng 5 is giving permission to do something that is recommended by the manufacturer, and manufacturer's recommendations are not mandatory under Part 43. There is one exception to that, and that is if you have adopted or opted to have an inspection schedule that incorporates manufacturer's recommended maintenance intervals. So Eng 5 doesn't, losing Eng 5 doesn't mean you lose anything. You're gaining a little bit. Did that answer you?
Obviously it did, Mick.
Okay.
With the next question, with the close tie-up to Part 21 and release of air-based on that, has Casa considered the insurance cost of this?
I'm not quite sure what that means. Is the person who asked that question online somewhere to expand?
Yeah, sorry, that was a typo. Release of the aircraft based on the fact that we're now going to be assessing the release on Part 21 and like the relevant documentation there. If you're an individual Lamy, you covered in part the insurance question before, but it's going to radically change your liability for release of that aircraft.
Right, okay, so this is one of the reasons I think why it's demonstrably reasonable that we have introduced or intending to introduce the IA function. So there are quite a few people, and I understand their point of view. Say I'm a qualified Lamy, have been for many years. I'm generally competent in airworthiness. Why do I need an additional qualification? Our answer to that would be, yes, you are probably very good at doing maintenance, but you've never been demonstrably trained to understand Part 21. And I think that would be a concern in relation to liability and insurance. It's not reasonable to ask a person to make a declaration about something that they have not demonstrated competency in. There are different ways to demonstrate competency. So what we have elected to do here is introduce an assessment It's an online training course that explains the Part 21 certification basis, and when you've passed the online assessment at the end of that, it should be adequate to demonstrate that you have gained and demonstrated competency in relation to that function. So I think that that level, the competency part of an insurance concern would be addressed. Beyond that, as Mick was talking about before, the insurance companies we've talked to don't see any issues with this proposal in general. The IA concept is quite common around the world, and most insurance companies are multinational. So I don't foresee any issues there. But look, if there are some residual technical concerns, then happy to investigate them, but I don't think it would be a major issue.
All right, thank you for that.
Thanks, Ryan. Okay, next question. Will weight control authorities need to transition to AMTCs, and will weight control activities still need to be under CAO 100.7?
Mick, would you like to explain the new weight control arrangements?
Yes, basically any Lamy can certify for weighing an aircraft, but in order to do so under Part 43, they need to have at least done it once under the supervision of somebody who's able to do it. So there will always be work there for people who have a weight control authority now, and they can have an AMTC to do that in Part 43 and certify for it. However, I'm sorry, what was the other part of that question?
The other part, I'll repeat the whole question, Mick, just so you've got it in context. Will weight control authorities need to transition to AMTCs? And will weight control activities still need to be under CAO 100.7?
Okay, the second part is about the CAO. All the 95 and 100 series CAOs will be disapplied under Part 43 because Part 43 is not subject to cars, and most of the CAOs have been made under the cars. So no, 100.7 won't apply.
Thanks, Mick. I hope that clarifies the question. Otherwise, Alex, if you could just let us know.
I can certainly expand on that offline later if anybody needs more information.
Thank you, Mick. Next question. With the change in approach to MA for Part 43, for example, NDT fluoro pen would be easily then obtained, and it was removed from the B1.1. Is that something you want to take, Ben, or will I defer to Neil?
Sure, Neil could get into that. I didn't quite capture the intent of the question. So if Neil got it, then by all means. Otherwise, maybe in a bit of expansion.
Oh, we might get Ryan if he could expand on that.
All right. So in the slides, it suggested that there was a slight change in approach to the maintenance authority or the ability to perform individual tasks, like, for example, the NDT fluoro pen. Now, that particular privilege was repealed from our 1.1 privileges with the removal of us being able to use any fluoro pen product without specialist training, like i.e. under a 145, or going to a full standalone NDT level 1 authority at a minimum. So would the new Part 43 open up an easier pathway for Lamy's to regain that privilege, as it's been a fair detriment to the GA industry?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. It's Neil here. We're still in the process of developing the advisory material around obtaining NDT privileges under Part 43, so as an AMTC. We're talking with the NDT board at the moment. At this stage, the ability to gain NDT approvals, is largely unchanged from the current advisory material that Casa produces. What we are, however, having said that, the NDT approvals currently are basically just run through maintenance orgs. So you've got to be employed in a organisation, as you're probably aware, an organisation who, well, a Car 30, who has NDT privileges, and then there's a supervising level 3 who supervises and signs off on the competency of the training, and then the person can apply to Casa. What we're talking to the NDT board about is for an individual who's not employed inside a maintenance organisation that carries out NDT, how will they be supervised by a level 3 and be, you know, that level 3 provides the oversighting training as such and competency assessment. So it's still a work in progress. Whether it's going to be an easier path or not, at this stage I can't really say because we haven't nailed those nitty-gritties out yet.
All right, no worries. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Ryan. I might give this one to you, Mick. The privileges for Lamy's appear to be slightly relaxed under Part 43 for private category aircraft. So this is a two-pronged question. Can a B1.1 with an E1 electrical exclusion replace a battery on a private CAT Cessna C208 and certify for the RTS? I'll get you to answer that one and then I'll come back with the second bit.
Yes, that's not an exclusion that we even consider as significant for a Part 43 Lamy. He can do that work, or she could do that work.
Okay, second part is, can a B1.1 without a B300 series, i.e. a King Air, type rating certify a RTS for a private category B350?
I'm not sure what the intent of that question is. Is a person online who asked it?
We can ask them to come online.
If it's a question, can they approve that aircraft for return to service without it being type rated? There are two different answers to that. If it's just for doing a maintenance task on it, yes, they can, provided they have previously done that maintenance task at least once under the supervision of somebody who's able to certify for it. Can they authorise it for return to service after an annual inspection? No, they'd have to have an IA, and if they didn't have that type of aircraft on their licence, they would have had to done an inspection under the supervision of somebody who has.
Thanks, Mick.
I think the main point to make there, Fee, is just to re-emphasise what we were saying earlier. There is more flexibility, but it's competency-based. So what Mick was describing there is one of the ways you can expand your competency, which is if you've got the core licence that covers the aircraft, then doing a task under supervision, successfully doing a task under supervision and keeping records of that is a way to incrementally expand your privileges, but it's only relevant to those tasks. It doesn't give you full type coverage.
Now, it looks like we're only going to go slightly over time. We do have two more questions in the chat. The next one is, if the CAOs are disappearing, authorities issued, it seems, would also disappear. So how will WCA authorities continue in Part 145, or will that be another kind of approval?
The CAOs are not disappearing completely. They're just being progressively disapplied as we move into the new world. So if somebody currently holds a weight control authority and they're working on aircraft in the transport sectors, air transport sectors, then that weight control authority will continue and they can continue to use it. It will no longer be necessary under Part 43, and if they want, they can transition into an AMTC. There is a longer a parallel piece of work underway to continue the Casa transition for all the air transport continuing airworthiness rules, and eventually repealing those CAOs in their entirety is part of that larger body of work. But that's not settled yet.
Thanks, Ben. Next question. How does an existing SOM integrate into Part 43? Will we continue to maintain in accordance with the SOM?
Mick can answer that one.
Yeah, you can. You can. We've provided a transitional clause that says that you can continue to use your existing system of maintenance if you wish, or you can it would be treated as an approved inspection program, or you can modify it to be just an inspection program. You'll have a range of choices, but one of them is to just continue business as usual.
Thanks, Mick. I might have another one for you.
Okay.
They're very popular this afternoon.
Earning my pay, huh?
Will there be consideration for a bilateral agreement between the FAA and Casa for inspection and certification, RTS, of private category aircraft? This might enable Lamy's to certify for private category and registered aircraft.
That hasn't been considered. What we have considered is that if a person holds or has held an FAA inspection authorization, provided they've got an Australian Lamy license, we will credit them with that and give them, they won't need to go through the examination process to get an Australian IA.
I'll also add a little bit to that, Fee.
Okay.
Unfortunately, bilateral agreements require both countries to be willing and able. We do have a scope of bilateral with the FAA, which is actually really encouraging for us. It might be possible to expand it, but generally speaking, the FAA has never really shown any particular interest in a bilateral that covers maintenance. It was a similar story with the EASA rollout, 66-42-145. I think there was an unrealistic expectation that EASA and the European Union Parliament would naturally be inclined to make an agreement with Australia. We continue to try to bring that to fruition, but we've been consistently told that at the level of the European Union, so not the technical level, the political level, that is unlikely to happen in the near future. So whilst we would very much like more agreements, we do have to temper our expectations, particularly when we are stepping up. Being realistic, EASA and the FAA are by far the two biggest regulators. They have agreements amongst themselves, but they don't necessarily extend those agreements down to countries more like Australia. We will try nonetheless.
Thank you, Ben. Next question. Will an independent Lamy be able to carry out and release to service the overhaul of a piston engine under Part 43? You want to take that one, Mick?
Indeed. Yes, the requirement is that the Lamy has to have access to the necessary data and any special tools and equipment, including a test apparatus for testing the engine. And if they've never pulled an engine apart before, they can't just go and rip one out and try and overhaul it. They've got to do one under the supervision of somebody who can certify for an overhaul first. All of this is about showing that, about being either having done it before or being shown how to do it and showing that you're competent to do it.
Thank you. Oh, look, now that I've said we're coming to the end of the questions, they're coming in. Next question. Can my current schedule of experience be considered for an AMTC 5 licence, i.e. the requirements for the issue of an AMTC 5? Mick.
AMTC 5 is for maintenance of warbirds. Is that the one? If that's the one they're talking about, yes, indeed. It's up to the administering authority, of which there is only one at the moment. That's the Australian Warbird Association. They will be issuing the AMTCs, and they'll issue them, you know, according to a process in their manual of assessment and training if necessary. So if you've got an SOE, you know, plenty of experience on warbird maintenance, you'd be looking pretty good.
Thank you, Mick. Okay, next question is, do we have a new implementation date for Part 43? I first went to a meeting in 1989. Well, maybe that's a typo, I think, where this transition was going to happen within 2 years. I think it might have been 2019, perhaps. Finally, about 4 years ago, Part 43, disappeared, hang on. Part 43 was to be implemented within 3 months, then another 6 months, then another 6 months, and here we are. So, Ben, could you confirm what we're working towards?
I can confirm the joys of working in the public service. We have, look, over decades. This is not Casa's first trip down the far path. History is history, unfortunately. We've recently had a new government. We believe that there is a general understanding across government and the wider community that we need to do better for GA. I think Part 43 is generally acknowledged as a pretty good step in the right direction. We are extremely hopeful that it will be high enough on the new government's agenda to get made this year. A lot of that will depend, of course, on reactions from industry. So if you're a supporter, then please let us know. But unfortunately, I can't give you a definitive answer, only promises of best efforts and an expectation given on our genuine belief that this is a good reg set. We would like to see it made this year and implemented next year, but there's no such thing as a guarantee on these matters.
Thank you. Okay. Next question. Will an AMO be involved in the maintenance requirements of a private category aircraft under Part 43 rules?
An AMO can be involved, but if it's a simple small aircraft, then it's not required. So, like I was talking about before, more generally, 145 maintenance organisations were always and are still intended to be made available across the whole spectrum. So 145 is a higher safety assurance standard than an independent Lamy. So of course, that is an option that we intend to make available. So they absolutely can, but as you move down the spectrum, the requirement to have a maintenance organisation as your primary maintenance provider is removed.
Thank you. So, well, this is more of a comment than a question. It appears that AMOs have been written off maintenance requirements for private category aircraft except component maintenance. Is that correct?
No, not across the board. So even under Part 43, it's not one size fits all. There are step changes in Part 43. For example, more complex maintenance like turbine engine overhauls and scheduled maintenance of transport category aircraft. So an aircraft like a private 737, for example, the primary maintenance provider of that aircraft, even if it is under Part 43, doing private operations, will be a maintenance organisation. So not across the board, but for your average small Cessna, Piper, Mooney, then a maintenance organisation is not required, it would be optional.
Thanks, Ben. Okay, next question. If we want to maintain an aircraft this year, we need to apply for a CAR 30 approval, is that right?
Well, applying for a Car 30 is still a valid option and will be for some years yet. So whilst Part 43 we would really like to make this year, the Car 30 will persist and is actually the nominally required maintenance provider for the old charter sector. So there's still a firm place for Car 30s, but progressively as we move away from the cars, people who want or need a maintenance organisation approval to support their business will need to look at Casa options. So 145 is obviously here to stay. We're currently working on what the maintenance organisation legislation should look like for the 133 and 135 air transport sectors. So there's a parallel project that covers that more generally. So look, at the moment, if you're looking to start up a maintenance organisation business, then Car 30 is still a pathway. But strongly encourage you to look at Part 145.
Thanks, Ben. So next question is, will a PNG issued IA be able to be transferred? So I might give that one to Neil.
Thank you. At this stage, the PNG IA hasn't been considered. Now, whether it hasn't, I'm not sure whether it hasn't been considered on the fact that we just haven't, it's slipped through. But that would be a really good thing to put into our consultation hub, please, for consideration. So, Bill, if you could jump on the consultation hub and please put that comment in, because I'm not sure whether it's purely by oversight or we have considered it and rejected it. I'm not sure. So if you could put that in, that'd be much appreciated. Thanks.
It was oversight.
Thanks, Mick.
Thank you. Next question. To expand on an earlier question, if a MSB comes in that calls for an NDT inspection, example wing spar bolt holes, would this still be required for the private owner? So Neil, you can take this one too.
No worries. Because it's a manufacturer's mandatory service bulletin, it will not be mandated under Part 43 unless it comes out as an airworthiness directive.
Next question. So there is a requirement regarding turbine aircraft that a facility will need an approval to conduct maintenance and not just an individual IA. So Mick, Neil, you want to take this one, Mick?
I can grab that one too,
Okay.
Fee. With regards to turbine engines, turbine engine overhaul and any components essential for the running of that turbine engine must be conducted within an AMO. However, your standard, what you'd call on-wing field maintenance may be done by an individual IA, provided the aircraft's not a transport category aircraft. If it's a transport category aircraft with the turbine engine, all the scheduled maintenance would have to be done within an AMO. Hope that answered the question.
Well, I've just got to clarify with Hayden a couple of things. Hayden, there were a few questions that you'd popped into the chat earlier on. I just wanted to make sure that we have covered them off for you. If you just want to give us a thumbs up or put your hand up to indicate that we have.
You're fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, surprisingly, I think we have covered all the questions. So we've only gone slightly over time, which is very good. So thank you all so much for your participation and the robust discussions. We've had some really, really good questions today. So what's next? We will email you after this session and provide you with any additional information that was covered during the session. It looks like we've covered all the questions that we were put to us today, but if we haven't, please let us know by sending an email into the regulatory program mailbox. And as Ben said, we want to make sure that we get the rules right. So don't forget to have your feedback counted by visiting our consultation hub. The address is up there, and please do so before the 19th of June. And as you know, our information sessions have been pretty hard to get into, with spots filling very, very quickly. So we have more scheduled. So please spread the word to your colleagues if they have missed out. Next week we will be in Cairns doing face-to-face seminars. So if you're in Cairns or you have a colleague that's in Cairns, please get them to jump online and register. And the same thing for Parafield the following week. And our last webinar will be Thursday, the 16th of June. So thank you all so much for taking the time out of your busy day to join us today. And I hope you have a great afternoon. Goodbye, everybody.